attendee list but needs to be recognized as sitting in as an executive committee member, please raise your hand or let us know otherwise. We will need to promote you. We have to show all of the members who are actively engaging as the committee today. I don't see any other hands.
Yeah, this is Norris Brandt.
Yes.
Excuse me. And our San Juan Basin Authority Board voted, I think it was last month, to make me the primary, and Bill Green will be our secondary, our alternate. And I will send you the resolution.
Okay, thank you. I think we're good. I don't see any other hands, so I think we can proceed.
Welcome, Norris.
Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to call the South Orange County Watershed Management Executive Committee meeting to order. Thank you for being with us today. And Tiffany Ackley will not be with us today, so I will be leading the meeting. I'm Kay Havens with El Toro Water District. So please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Put your hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, Republic,
and to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, just
Yes.
before we get going, I do see two hands. Dave Wheeler and Charles Busslinger both have their hands raised. So I think that's just to acknowledge that Charles, are you sitting in as alternate?
Yeah, sorry. I'm still trying to figure out how to put my hand down.
No worries. We just want you were moved up already, so just wanted to make sure. And Dave, did you have a question?
No, I just pressed the little hand button before we went live, and it doesn't really indicate whether it's up or down, that it's not too clear. So just from
Unfortunately, I apologize, Tim. I can't seem to get it to go back down now that I've been promoted. I apologize. I don't have a question.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Kay.
It's all right. At least we know that feature works because I can't find it on mine. So,
well, you have to push participants, and it's over underneath that.
Gotcha. I see it now. Thank you. All right. So next slide, please. Do we need to do roll call?
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Tiffany Ackley. Kay Havens.
Present.
Debbie Neve.
Here.
Bill Moorhead. Sandra Jacobs.
Here.
Megan U. Schneider.
Charles Busslinger sitting in for Megan U. Schneider.
Kelly Jennings. Lisa Bartlett.
Kevin Lanuma here for Lisa Bartlett.
Mike Frost.
Mike Frost may come, but I'm his alternate if he doesn't. But if he does, you can kick me down.
Okay, so right now, can you state your name and that you're sitting in for him?
Yeah, Lisa Zawaski for Michael Frost, Dana Point. Thanks.
Brad McGear.
This is Brendan Dugan in for Brad McGurr.
McLaughlin.
Here.
Steve Knobloch. Sue Kemp. Norris Brandt.
Here.
Dave Wheeler.
Here.
Doug Erdman. Carol Moore.
Present.
Here.
Betty Burnett.
Here.
Brian Goodell. Ed Mandich. Nikki Morazetti. And Howard Hart. And that's it.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. We have several important things to go over. So may I have the next slide when convenient? So today you're going to be seeing AB 361 twice. The first time is to confirm this meeting that we're having now. And then the second time is to confirm it going forward. So what we need to do for the first AB 361 is to review and consider the circumstances of the state of emergency, confirm that the South Orange County Watershed Management Area Executive Committee finds that we are still in a state of emergency and that the state of emergency continues to directly impact our ability and the ability of the members to meet safely in person, or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. So based upon the findings and recommendations number 1 and 2, the South Orange County Watershed Management Area Executive Committee will continue teleconference meetings unless and until the findings and recommended actions 1 and 2 no longer apply. So we would be looking for a motion on item number 2.
I'll move approval.
Thank you.
Item number 2, Sandra Jacobs, Santa Margarita.
Thank you, Sandra.
And
I can second it. It's Betty.
It's a first by Sandra Jacobs and a second by Betty Burnett. Thank you, ladies. Any comments?
Maria will do
I guess
roll.
I have a comment.
Yes.
When are we going to stop and meet back in person?
Well, that's the second AB 361. So we'll be getting to that.
Okay,
after.
because yeah, I think
thank
we're out of the danger zone now for a while.
So we'll have a discussion on that in just a moment. So, so far, I think we're good for this teleconference. So Maria, do you want to read the roll, please?
Yes. Betty Burnett,
Aye.
Brendan Dugan,
Aye.
Carol Moore, Charles Busslinger,
Carol Moore, aye.
Yes.
Debbie Neve,
Aye.
Doug Erdeman,
Aye.
Ed Mandich,
Aye.
Karen McLaughlin,
Aye.
Kay Havens,
Aye.
Kevin Onuma,
Aye.
Lisa Sawaski,
Aye.
Dave Wheeler,
Aye.
Norris Brandt,
Aye.
Sandra Jacobs,
Aye.
and that's it.
Very good.
And Maria, just real quick, Sean Pelletier is sitting in for the city of Aliso Viejo, so he needs to be promoted and he can participate in the next roll vote.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So do we have any public comments on non-agenda items? If you have comments, you can use the raise hand feature or the chat function. Do we have any hands raised? I see none.
We do not at this time.
Do we have any items in chat?
We do not have anything in the Q&A.
All right, so then I believe we can proceed to the next item. This is item number 4, the 2022 meeting schedule amendments. So item number 4, Jenna, would you like to lay this out for us?
Sure.
Thank
So as Kay mentioned, there's 2 conversations about AB 361 today. This is the second. Is put forward as the meeting schedule because the options in order to proceed with AB 361 that includes adding meetings to the agenda. But to build on the staff report or to summarize, we in November brought forward to the committee and the committee approved a schedule for this calendar year, including primary, alternate, and AB 361 meetings through March, this March meeting. The primary quarterly meetings are intended to be our 4 main decision-making meetings. Our cooperative agreement for the group commits to holding 2 committee meetings a year. Typically during grant application years, we also ask for alternate dates if needed to comply with the grant schedule, application schedule. As you'll see when we get further on about the grant, specific to the grant, right now it appears that our grant application date will now be February of 2023. So though we will be kicking off a call for projects and having technical technical assistance workshops and other stakeholder workshops that the executive committee may engage with in between. We do not need the alternate dates that we originally requested. And then also, as I just noted, we had only approved monthly meetings through this meeting. So if the group so chooses, in order to continue teleconferencing for additional meetings and through to the next full quarterly meeting, additional AB 361 dates will need to be approved for the 2022 meeting calendar. Next slide. So the two options right now are to, first of all, we're asking for the group to consider the next quarterly meeting being held on August 3rd. So as I mentioned, we typically have 4 quarterly meetings that represent the primary decision-making meetings of this group. And in a regular non-pandemic year where we don't have AB 361, those are our 4 meeting dates for the whole year. We are asking, given the grant cycle, to focus our efforts for our next meeting in August, given that we know we won't have any grant-based decisions to make at least until August, perhaps until November. And typically for one of the 2 meetings in the year, we don't have any decisions for this group to make. So we're asking for us to kind of move forward with planning the next meeting for August 3rd. That's your first decision. So there will be the recommendations will include first, recognizing that as part of the calendar. The second recommendation is to consider, for the purposes of this meeting, depending on whether or not you approve it to be August, but either way, either approving continuation of these monthly teleconference meetings that we've been having that are required through AB 361 to be held every 30 days. That would mean adding 5 additional dates to the calendar, or, and that's to facilitate the meeting that includes August, if we so choose for the next meeting to be held in August, because as we did at the top of this meeting, findings need to be made for the meeting you're in. The other option is meeting next in person. So date dependent on that first recommended action. However, the other option is to meet in person, and we would no longer need monthly meetings for AB 361. The note that I have there, obviously none of us knows what'll happen over the next few months. However, if the committee does decide to go next in person, AB 361 does require that the next meeting would be in person in order to go back to teleconference meetings. So I just wanted to make note of that. The next meeting would have to have some in-person members. I believe a quorum would have to be in person. Next slide. So we've summarized these in 2 recommended actions, the second of which has 2 options. So the first recommended action is to approve holding the next full quarterly meeting on August 4th. The second is to confirm the meeting schedule by approving either additional dates added to the calendar. The dates are March 31st, April 28th, May 26th, June 23rd, and July 21st. And those are for the purposes of making findings per AB 361. That would also include making the findings at the August 4th meeting. The second option would be to hold the next full quarterly meeting, assuming August, with no additional dates to make AB 361 findings. That does have a caveat. We do need a venue. We have outgrown Laguna Niguel. If all 22 members of the committee are in attendance, we don't have anywhere for everyone to sit. So we do need to find a venue. So the additional piece to the second part of the recommended action number 2 is to please provide feedback on meeting venues, if that is the option you choose. And that's the summary of recommended actions for this item.
So let's go back to the committee and get some comments from the committee members. So Carol, I see your hand is up.
I did. In a perfect world, I would say let's just go to August 3rd. However, it doesn't work out that way. I would suggest, I wish you didn't have to meet every month, just briefly, but I can't see how you can avoid that, to to maintain the possibility. Once you say you don't do it, then you're obligated to meet in person. And I know we have, well, anyway, that's my thinking is likely it will work out that you can meet in person in August, but I'm a person that likes to keep the door open. So my opinion is to leave it open and not leave it all or nothing on August 3rd.
Thank
Was
you.
I clear?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you.
Betty Bernay?
Yeah, I know that councils have had different views of AB 361, but I just wondered if the staff could say, is there no opportunity if we do not make monthly AB 361 findings, is there no opportunity to do a special meeting just for the purpose of making that finding like right before August if it turns out that we're back? And I also thought that it also expired at the end of March and maybe the state was going to take some other action. So those would be my two questions.
So the current emergency declaration expires March 31st. Kay, I think you said at the top of the meeting or separately that you had heard that it might be extended into June. But I don't have a sense for that. I just know the current expiration date. They do have the alternate option, meaning that if the local body still feels that it's necessary, that there is that option. But I conferred with our county council, and her understanding of AB 361 is, I guess it wouldn't preclude you from having a special meeting, but that special meeting would have to be in person. So if you wanted to have a special meeting immediately preceding the August meeting to allow that one to be teleconferenced, you would have to have a quorum meet physically in person and allow for public participation in person at that special meeting in order to facilitate the next one being teleconferenced. So that's our current understanding. But the other thing is we have no, like you said, I don't know, and I haven't heard whether or not they're, if the state still, I'm sure, reserves the opportunity to make adjustments depending on the rates. So, if in the interim something else, if AB 361 gets amended, or if the governor takes another action, that may also provide a different opportunity. But we wouldn't know until we got closer.
So if I understand you correctly, Jenna, AB 361 could be revisited should the emergency arise again, and we could revisit it at a later date, but we would need to all meet in person. Those two things kind of don't kind of jive. But let's get to hear what Dave Wheeler has to say. Dave?
Well, I don't know. All these questions confuse me even more. So we have to meet in person to say we're not going to meet in person.
I'm with you on that.
I admit it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But yes, the interpretation of our council is that the way AB 361 works is you have to make that decision past the date that it was originally set, which was September 30th. It now applies that in order to make AB 361 findings as effectively a reset to start teleconference meetings again, if you break that 30-day iteration, you need to make that decision in person. I don't know why, but that is the way AB 361 is currently written. And it doesn't, the legislature could amend that or take a subsequent action. We don't know, but that is the current language as we understand it.
Okay, I'm not sure what to say then, because if the purpose is that there was a real danger of people getting together, then the last thing you want to do is have them meet together to say we can't meet together. That's what if you can't say we misinterpret. We think it's really 90 days. There's a misprint. After I give up.
I understand it is confusing. But again, I will say if we don't know if the state will take any additional action. We also don't know if the state of emergency will be extended. So
a state official to tell them, hey, there are groups that meet every 90 days. So 30 days is stupid. and ask them to amend it the next time they do anything or do away with it? I mean, maybe we ought to lobby for that or something, or
I
tell your
agree.
local representative, say it has to be, you know, at the meeting before your next meeting. If it's 30 days, okay. If it's 90 days, okay. It's just, anyway, I give up trying to figure out Sacramento.
All righty, Carol, I see your hand is still up. Did you just forget to put it down? Or do you have more to say?
I didn't have anything else to say. I didn't lower it. Sorry.
And Sandra?
Thank you, Sandra Jacobs, Santa Margarita Water District. I've been listening to what everybody says, and I'm gonna switch gears and then come back to the meeting dates. The venue issue. Jenna, the reason Laguna Niguel can't hold 22 people is because of social distancing protocol?
No. So, well, you were touching arms in that facility. So if anyone did want, even though that is changing soon, there is 0 distancing at that particular facility. But the bigger issue is that we had tables in the front of the section for the public, and we do, per the Brown Act, need to make sure it is made abundantly clear who is participating as an executive committee member, meaning making the decisions, and who is a member of the public. The executive committee members have to make it known that they're present, whereas the members of the public don't have to sign anything or state that they're there. So the issue that we have at Laguna Niguel is that we just never had all 22. So we were able to fit everybody who came with like one meeting exception. But if we have, now that we have this effectively a reset because we haven't met in so long, if we had all 22, there would be executive committee members sitting in the audience, and that would be with everyone touching arms and sharing microphones. So
Okay.
it's just that we've somewhat outgrown the facility.
So we've outgrown that, and are there, and I know Santa Margarita is very too small, even if we opened up the rooms to put 22 of us together and an audience of probably about the same amount, at least in the past. So did you have an alternative in mind for a meeting venue, or is it a clean slate right now, starting from scratch?
We have a bit of a clean slate. In between meetings, we did have, I've been reaching out, I reached out to the city of Lake Forest because they have a new facility, but we haven't been able to connect yet. So that may provide a potential option, but we need to firm that up. We haven't been able to talk further about it. Otherwise, we have not had anybody else come forward, and I have gone through the facilities that I've had meetings in, and they're not any larger. So it would be Lake Forest, or if we can make that work, or hopefully, and I don't want to put them on the spot because we haven't confirmed that in any way. But that's why we wanted to put that out there, is that we don't currently have confirmed another option.
So
Jenna, this is Doug Erdman, South Coast Water District. I also work for the city of Lake Forest. So if you reach out to me directly, I can get you in touch with the right people.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay,
excellent.
I probably shouldn't volunteer this, but Laguna Hills, we do have a very, very large facility at a rec center. That is really big. It would accommodate well more than 22 at however many, whatever distance you want. I'm not sure they're going to like me volunteering that because they book things there, and it's expensive to get in there. Do we have a budget for rooms or no? Or is it just volunteer free?
It's been free.
Okay.
So we don't have a line item for the facility, unfortunately. Okay.
So let me finish my second part of my question. So that's kind of a work in process then. So initially, when I heard you go through the agenda item, I was all ready to just simply meet in person in August 4th. But after hearing what I did about not just the potential emergency, but kind of our venue issue. So my personal thought would be to go ahead and approve, as cumbersome as it is, I would agree to approve the monthly continuation, and that way we have it in our back pocket, because we could always choose and notice the meeting to be in person. Is that correct, Jenna? We always have that option, but once we go that option, we can't go back, correct?
Yeah, you can. Yes, but you can go back as long as you meet in person once. So yes, if you were to approve the meeting dates for AB 361 findings at any time, you could decide to stop that. So you could get together and not make the findings, and then that meeting effectively ceases, and then your next meeting would need to be in person.
So approve it. The most flexibility for us as the executive committee is to approve these monthly meetings, in my opinion. So that's what I would support, Vice Chair Havens, at this point, and I'm welcome to hear any other comments. Otherwise, I'm ready to make the appropriate motion, which I think is 2A.
I'll second it. It's Betty.
We might still have some more comment from
Yes,
Dave,
I'll lower my hand.
but you've made the motion and Betty seconded it. Thank you. And Dave, did you have more to add? I see Dave's hand still up. Amanda, you're next.
I just wanted to offer for a venue option. However, I know that this is not ideal. In our downtown Santa Ana office, we do have a large community room that sort of as a backup, if we can't find a venue in the South County area, we could do that. I guess I would also want to put out there, just for kind of a flexibility of thinking, if we don't do the monthly meetings and we have to meet in person to then restart the remote meetings, remember, we only need quorum. So we wouldn't, what we could do similarly to sort of how we've been doing the bare bones 361 calls, where it's we basically we have quorum, we get on, we say, yep, we still have a state of emergency, in the intervening times. That would be a similar in-person meeting. We would only need, we wouldn't need a venue for 22. We would need a venue to be able to host quorum, and we could let people know when we had reached quorum, have a brief in-person meeting with public access, and go back in case we needed to re-engage. That's just my sort of thoughts on that, but I'll let the committee continue.
Can I butt in just a second?
Yes.
Sorry. I just went over and called our the manager that manages the recreation center I was talking about, that's really large, and he said if it's a government agency, like the Watershed is in essence, that they can waive the fees for that and can get us in there. Of course, the dates have to be coordinated and set up, but we could potentially meet there.
Okay, I will. If you could get me the contact, then please, Dave, I will reach out and make sure we've got all of the AV stuff that we need to have for our group and everything.
Okay,
so
let me get
I
to you
will
right now.
definitely. Thank you. I will add that to the list of
His name is
potentials.
Dave Reynolds.
Oh, okay.
Number 949-707-2685.
Okay, thank you. I will reach out.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave. The good news is it sounds like we have a couple more venue options than we had when we started, right, Jenna? And at the current time, we have a motion and a second on the table regarding, was it 2A, Sandra?
That's correct. And I was kind of asking Jenna if that was confirm remainder of meeting schedule for 2022 and approve either A, additional 2022 meeting dates of March 31st, 28th,
Yep.
July for purposes of reviewing. That's the one.
Yes. 2A is adding additional meeting dates to facilitate making AB 361 findings that could be canceled throughout the year as things change.
Can I be clear on that one? If we do pass that and we get a venue to meet in person big enough, we can cancel without going through a meeting to cancel it?
Good question.
That's a good question. I think you would need to meet at least one time to make that decision. And I would need to be notified in advance to make sure it was on the agenda. Right. So if we were able to coordinate and one of those venues had all of the necessary facilities that we could set up for the group, then we would agendize that for one of these meetings. And then you would make findings for that meeting to effectively say, here forward, we are going to meet at this venue or for this upcoming meeting. And the rest of the meeting dates are then removed from the calendar.
But we do that remotely is what he's asking.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so long as you have today confirmed 2A, then yes, you would have that option.
Okay. That probably sounds the most flexible, I guess.
All right, so I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so I think that this goes to a vote.
And just to be clear, we also need an action on one, recommended action number 1.
Oh, okay, so
I think they can be done together, but
I'll amend my motion to the recommended actions in the staff report. This is Sandra Jacobs, Santa Margarita. Number 1, approve holding the next full quarterly meeting August 4th instead of May, which by the way I support, because based on the schedule that you put in the agenda, we'll still be in the project processing stage. And then number 2A below that. So 1 and 2A. I forgot I had some comments on number 1, but that's my motion.
do we have a second?
I'll second it, Betty.
Okay, so the first and the second stand.
I will go ahead and do roll call.
Thank you.
Okay. Dave Wheeler,
Aye.
Betty Burnett,
Yes.
Brendan Dugan,
Aye.
Carol Moore,
Aye.
Charles Buslinger,
Yes.
Debbie Neve,
Aye.
Doug Erdman,
Aye.
Ed Mandich,
Aye.
Karen McLaughlin. Aye. Kay Havens,
Aye.
Kevin Onuma,
Aye.
Lisa Zawoski,
Aye.
Norris Brandt,
Aye.
Sandra Jacobs,
Aye.
I'm sorry, did you get my aye? This is Norris Brandt.
yes.
Thank you.
Sean Pelletier.
Aye.
And that's it.
Thank you, Maria. With that, we move on to item number 5. Jenna, take it away.
all right. The hot topic is that we have another round of IRWM grant funding. This is the last round of Proposition 1, which is the current bond approved in 2014 that we'll be implementing. And we've got some newer folks in the group. And I also wanted to just remind everybody of the role and responsibility of the executive committee. So we're going to just do a brief walkthrough. All of this was also in the staff report for your reference going forward. And then Andy will also, we've made some updates to the project submittal so that it's more streamlined for everybody. Andy, next slide. IRWM is both a construct and a grant program. So what we're talking about is a grant program. Actually, you can go to the next slide, Andy. That has representative divisions throughout the state called funding areas. Funding is allocated in voter-approved bonds to those funding areas. We in South Orange County are in the San Diego funding area, and we have an agreement with the 3 other recognized regions, San Diego IRWM and Upper Santa Margarita IRWM, for South Orange County to have, it should be 12.29% of the total allocated amount for the San Diego funding area. And that means that we don't openly compete with one another, which is helpful. It also lets us know from the beginning of any individual grant round how much we have to allocate to projects. And we also, through IRWM, it's much more self-determined. We utilize our IRWM plan, the goals, objectives, and strategies therein to decide what the priorities are for our own region. Next slide. So to give a little bit of perspective, this group, through becoming an IRWM region through the program and having an accepted IRWM plan, which is no small undertaking, and it's available on the website if anybody wants to peruse the plan. We have garnered funds through all voter-approved bonds that to date have allocated funds to the IRWM program. And you can see there the total grant award amount, and then the local match, which is summing all of the contributions toward projects that were supported through the grant. So those local contributions. And then that represents and then we have a representation of our local total investment. So today, including the first round of this grant, through Proposition 1, we've received just over $38 million. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the self-determination through our IRWM plan is really based primarily on the objectives, strategies, and goals. The goals are the 4 main drivers. Actually, you can go to the next slide, Andy. Natural resource protection, water quality enhancement, water supply reliability and efficiency, and flood risk management. Those are the 4 main goals. There are quantifiable objectives and strategies that refine or give more detail to what we mean by those 4 goals. All of this has been developed, vetted, re-vetted, and approved through this group over a number of years. And in the last IRWM plan update, we made all necessary adjustments to comply with Proposition 1. And we also combined water use efficiency and water supply into one category per the strategic vision. So this is something that has been driven by this group and our broader and interested parties throughout the region over the last over a decade. Next slide. So based on those priorities and the quantifiable metrics associated with it, meaning we weight all of those based on how important we think they are to our region, we develop project slates. So the intention through IRWM is to have to achieve multiple benefits. So projects coming through this program should offer multiple benefits. If they should all address climate change, if at all possible, they should service disadvantaged communities or underrepresented communities. And so because Proposition 1 in particular called out support for disadvantaged communities, which you see there defined as the acronym DAC, there is actually a provision that 10% of the total funds allocated throughout the program need to support DAC projects. In the first round of Proposition 1, we didn't have any projects come forward that serve disadvantaged communities in Orange County. We have historically, but not through Proposition 1. So that carries over into this round. So of the total amount we have available, which is about $3.2 million to allocate to projects, 1.27 of that will be allocated to disadvantaged community projects in South Orange County. And I will say we have in the past, if we haven't had adequate DAC projects come forward, we may have the opportunity of exchanging implementation funds with partners in San Diego or Riverside. However, we won't know that until very late in the grant application, almost near the grant application, and very late in the process of identifying projects. So for the purposes of this group and anyone considering submitting projects, we should consider our division of available funds, what you see here on this slide, which is 1.27 for DAC and about 2 million for general implementation. Next slide. This is, I realize, very tiny, but this is a snapshot of the process to include projects in the South Orange County IRWM plan, which is the first step to qualifying for an IRWM grant. And then the second, effectively, phase of this is if a project proponent, once on that plan, wants to be considered for a grant round, which we will now be in very soon, you'll see there, it starts with call for projects. We start an extensive process to quantify the relative benefits of all of these projects and compare them to one another so that we put together a multi-benefit portfolio of projects for that total quantified or total amount of funds we have available. The executive committee has a key role in final approval of that slate of projects. However, we have multiple steps in between. We have an ad hoc of the management committee that reviews and vets the projects. All of the results of that analysis are presented and provided at a stakeholder meeting where we walk through all of it. I will say that we've worked very hard to make that almost entirely quantified instead of qualitative. So though there are some qualitative considerations based on what DWR would like to see, it makes the process pretty streamlined to compare projects based on their relative merit. So you'll see a series of recommendations at what is likely to be the November meeting, where you'll have the opportunity to hear all about the projects and make a final determination about that slate. Next slide. So this is the process shown, I think, in a little bit clearer way. I have highlighted in orange boxes in particular, the two steps of the process where executive committee members, it's either optional or necessary that you be involved. So we right now are at the stage in between the first two boxes, waiting for DWR to finalize the guidelines and give us a final application schedule. We submitted comments on February, I think 17th, on the draft guidelines. There are some things DWR needs to work through. One provision I think I may have noted at the management committee meeting or at one of our last meetings, DWR has in there a recusal of anyone submitting a project from the final vote. So we need clarity on that, but we've included that all in our comments. So that will be worked out by DWR. Final guidelines are expected in April, and then that kicks off the rest of the process. So the call for projects at this time is likely to take place in the June to July timeframe. If we get the guidelines early enough, we may be able to move that up a bit. We want to make sure we give at least a month for that period of time. And that during that period, anyone who would like to solicit for funds will submit through the online process that Andy will detail in a moment. And then we go through an eligibility check. So making sure that the projects meet eligibility standards through DWR and Proposition 1, so that we're not working through the whole process for a project that doesn't qualify. And then we go through an extensive vetting process. We then have a stakeholder workshop where, like I said, we go through all of the math. And then we have all of those spots where we develop recommended slates. They come to the executive committee for final approval. That is right now slated for the November 3rd meeting. And then unless it changes, the final application is due to DWR in February 2023. I will say DWR, it would not be expected that they would move that up. If anything, they would move it out. So this schedule should be a good reference until we hear otherwise. Next slide. So I'll hand it over to Andy, and he's going to walk through how you enter a project on the IWM project list and in order to be considered for this round of funding.
Hi, thanks, Jenna. Yeah, good afternoon. So yeah, in anticipation of this next grant round, we took the opportunity to kind of overhaul our project submittal page. Before, on our hub site, we had just one page for projects where you could submit a project, also view the list and see completed projects. To kind of streamline that process, we broke it up into three separate pages, which I'll walk you through. So the first page is the project submittal page. Here we developed a new process that links the IRWM score sheet to the submittal form, which reduces data input. So when you upload your score sheet, the site reads the score sheet and then populates a lot of the inputs for the user, so they don't have to kind of put the same information in again. In addition, we have our site allows you to now update an existing project. So this image here shows you where you can search for your project if it's already on the list. You can then download that score sheet, make any changes you need, and then upload that back up. And then that also auto-populates. So when you upload it, you don't have to put that information in again as well. And then finally, we are going to have a button where you can go straight to the call for projects. That will be active when the call for projects is active. And that submittal tool will ask for more detailed information to assist with our project vetting process. Just a brief little update on the current project list. So this is on its own page. So you can view all of the potential projects currently on the IRWM project list. We have 43 projects in South Orange County. And by goal, those are mostly water supply, reliability, and efficiency with 28 projects. You have 8 water quality projects, 4 flood risk management projects, and then 3 natural resources protection projects. On that page, which is southocirwm.org/pages/projects, you can download the current project list. And then finally, on our projects page, we have our completed projects and fact sheets. So our previous data management system was a story map where you could scroll through all the different projects and get a high-level understanding of what each one did. We have embedded that into our hub site. And so this story map here, you can scroll through and see all of those different IRWM projects that have received funding in South OC. We also have downloadable fact sheets available for each project. And in the coming weeks, we should have the Prop 1 Round 1 funded projects in that story map as well.
Thank you very much. Jenna, anything else to add?
Nope, just encourage everyone, if they haven't already, to go on to our website and start playing around. I have been having calls with several folks, so I know that the interest level is out there. So I really recommend that you not wait until the call for projects opens. I recommend that anyone who may have a project they'd like to have considered, start getting those projects entered, because there is one note I will make. It does take us at least a couple days to make sure that all of your documents are in to get your project listed. So that first step, which is, as Andy said, either updated or adding a new one, that is a separate step from the call for projects. So please make sure you do that so that it is available in the system for the call for projects. So once that that tool gets added to the menu, just keep in mind that those are 2 separate steps. Otherwise, we look forward to everyone adding in some projects.
Thank you for that project review. And Andy, it was great to see the update on the website. That's always nice to see. I see we have a hand raised from Sandra Jacobs.
Hi, thank you. Sandra Jacobs, Santa Margarita Water District. Thank you so much for that presentation. You know, the county put in a lot of time and work and money into this website, and we didn't always have this. It wasn't always this easy. It was a lot of paperwork. So, you know, kudos to the county for developing this program that makes it so much easier for us. Two items. I did in the objective weighting that's used in that project score sheet. Has that changed at all over the years, or has that stayed the same?
It was updated or amended at the last time that we went through when we received a proposition that changed some of the things we had to consider. It's been updated, but it was all of the weighting was developed, I believe, in 2015 and then re-examined in 2018, and everyone felt like the actual weighting didn't need to change. The only real difference is that we merged those two goal categories. So
Right.
all of those weighted strategies needed to be mushed together and under one goal category. But it was a pretty streamlined process. So the actual weighting themselves did not need to change.
Thank you. And then I know you can't control this right now, but in your discussions with the regional board for these fundings, or state board rather, and I've heard you before in terms of, for example, Santa Margarita has a project in, let's say, San Juan Basin. If that is submitted for funding, I would not be able to vote. Same with South Coast Water District, and I understand that, but you know, I'm hoping that there will be enough flexibility. And it sounds like it's not set in stone yet, because there needs to be some flexibility for ties for multiple partners. Let's say South Coast, Santa Margarita. You know, you lose 2 votes just because you have a co-applicant. So I want you to really give us enough flexibility. I could understand one applicant, one vote. I would like to vote. If they turns out I can't, but we have a regional project that benefits multiple agencies, how's that going to work out? So in your discussions with them, please keep that in mind. And if there's anything we need to do on our back end as members of this executive committee, as far as who to talk to explain to them, it's not just cut and dry. There needs to be some flexibility. That would be the only thing I would ask of you. So thank you for the time, Madam Vice Chair and Jenna.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Kay. If I may, just respond to Sandra. So I do want you to know, Sandra, that we added extensive comments on this in our comment letter, as I'm sure you would expect. I asked DWR to consider the fact that we have an approved plan with an accepted governance structure that includes voting at this stage on a slate of projects, not individual projects. The voting is not done on individual projects. It is done on a collective and assesses collective benefit. So we had asked that if they do want recusals, that it be made abundantly clear on what that line is, or that they defer, and our preference being that they defer to the governance structure as approved in the accepted plans. And that has already made that consideration. By the time the vote gets to you, so many people have seen the projects and we've vetted them to the point where they either provide the benefit or they don't, because it's almost exclusively quantitative. So and we've been very lucky, because the way it has shaken out is that we've always gotten a really good balanced portfolio with the going exclusively on the quantifiable benefits. So we made that abundantly clear to DWR.
Good question. Great answer. Thank you.
Just wanted to express my opinion. Thank you very much. That's all I had, Vice Chair.
Thank you. We have a hand raised from Lisa Jaworski.
Hi, and I think Jenna already answered this at the end of her spiel, but there are some projects that could be already listed, but they may not be eligible or desired to be part of the next round of Prop 1. And I think, did you say there was an extra step that if you want to submit it for consideration for Prop 1, then there's going to be an extra step to say, okay, this project?
Yes, if you because the requirement to be listed on an IRWM plan is actually applies to other grant programs. there are projects on that list that don't have any intention of going after this grant funding. And so, yes, you would have to go through it this additional step. Otherwise, no, you may just, yes, you may exactly that. You may have a project listed on this project list and have no intention.
Okay, thank you. And then another quick question. It appears that the projects in the stormwater resources plan aren't on, they're two separate things. Like if there was a project on the stormwater resources plan, would we have to like import it or put it into the ERMP? Because it seems like they're not on both.
They should be. So if you
Oh,
see an issue, let me know, because when you submit a project to be included on this, the SWRP, one more acronym for everybody. So when you include a project on the stormwater resource plan, we required everyone to also submit the IRWM plan score sheet, because we felt that that was a rule through the State Water Board also. So to make sure that we were crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's, we did that. So if you think that there's an issue there, please let me know.
Okay, so all of the SWRP projects should be on the ERMP project database.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. And I was made aware that there's a typo on slide 24 for the link. It should be South OC IRWM and I think .org, and I think there was a typo on one of those slides.
Got it.
Just to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. Betty, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, Jenna, I apologize if I missed it, and I know we've been over these things so many times, but is the primary objectives, as has always been identified in the plan between natural resources, water quality, reliability, efficiency, and flood risk management, are all four of those areas going to be addressed by this next grant round, or will this next grant round be much more limited? Sometimes I know they give us very limited purposes of the round, or do we not know that yet?
No, we have a good idea at this point, and that's a good question. So Betty's referring to a prior round in 2014 where they kind of changed everything and said, we want you to focus on the drought, and we are only allowing this type of project. This time around, that is not what they are doing. They are actually relying more than any other round they have in the past exclusively on our IRWM plan. In fact, because we have the funding agreement with our counterparts in San Diego and Riverside, we don't have to do as much as some of the other funding areas to make that case. They're relying even more heavily on our own selection process. So we should be looking to our own plan for those drivers.
Okay, good to know. I guess another element of this is that I've always kind of wondered about, and I know we have, the submitted projects, the option to kind of really have sort of a showcase where we say, we got a really good amount of money and we did something that was, a good sized project with that money. So anyway, I mean, I've always kind of had that thought in my head for all the years that I've worked on this. And so I just share that with the group. It's just a comment.
Thank you, Betty. I think that concludes our committee member comments. Betty, your hand is still raised, and so you might want to put
sorry about that. I will take it down. Thank you.
Do we have any public comments from the public? I'm not seeing
any hand raised.
Okay, thank you. With that, this is a receive and file, so we can move on to item number 6. Jenna, would you like to carry this?
Yes. Next slide, please. So when we did this in the last 2-year budget cycle, but this group approves annual budgets on a 2-year grouped schedule. And I will show the tables in a second. But one of the reasons we do that is so that there is some flexibility in moving approved funds between fiscal years, depending on grant cycles. The budgets that we have, the cost share budgets largely provide support for the grant application processes. And when we originally proposed the budget amounts, it was based on about a 50-50 split between this current fiscal year, 21-22, and the next fiscal year, 22-23. Given that DWR has shifted that a bit, now the emphasis will be more on the second of the 2 fiscal years. So we are not asking for any changes to the work plan, meaning the work that would be accomplished. We are asking, in the total invoiced amounts will remain the same, and all of our processes to refund any unspent funds would still apply. So next slide, Andy. What we're asking is to move funds between the current fiscal year, about half of what we had allocated for consultant service support, to reflect the fact that we now will need more support in the second of the 2 fiscal years. So that means moving about $40,000 from this fiscal year to next fiscal year. But again, the invoiced amounts will remain the same. And if in the second fiscal year we don't spend, Andy, if you can go to the next slide, please. If we don't spend the total amount that you see there, any of that will be refunded to the cost share partners. So it doesn't change the amounts of funds that the cost share partners are paying into the support. Next slide. I think that's it. So the request is to move funds between the already approved budget years, but not to amend the budget amounts.
Very good. So any comments or questions from the committee? I don't see any public comments.
I don't see any hands.
So then would be calling for an action. Anybody willing to move this?
I would move it. I think that's reasonable. It's Betty.
Thank you, Betty. Do we have a second?
I'll second it. This is Debbie Neve.
Thank you, Debbie. Roll call vote, please.
Yes. Betty Burnett,
Aye.
Brendan Dugan,
Aye.
Charles Buslinger,
Aye.
Debbie Neve,
Aye.
Doug Erdman,
Aye.
Ed Mandich,
Aye.
Karen McLaughlin,
Aye.
Kay Havens,
Aye.
Kevin Onuma,
Aye.
Lisa Sawaski,
Aye.
Dave Wheeler,
Aye.
Norris Brandt, I'll come back to him. Sean Pelletier,
Aye.
Bill Moorhead,
Aye.
and Norris Brandt.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. With that, we move on to item number 7. Presentation update on the development of a restoration concept for Lower Aliso Creek. Jenna and Jennifer, would you like to take this?
Yes, I'll introduce the group. Andy, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Oh, and the next one. We had a fancy placeholder in the beginning. So this is a project that I'm sure, or a concept rather, that most of our group is probably at least somewhat familiar with. We had for almost 20 years worked with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on a feasibility study that wrapped up in 2017 to restore the lower 6 miles of Aliso Creek, extending between the Coastal Treatment Plant and Pacific Park Drive. There was, once the environmental documentation was posted publicly, we received a number of comments that there was not full public and local support for moving forward with the federal proposal. There was also a locally preferred plan that was supported by several of our local interested parties, including several of the city representatives that currently sit on this committee, that requested consideration of the existing healthy habitat and that more nature-based solutions be considered. The Army Corps' proposal involved a fair amount of sediment moving and laying back the channels throughout the system. And the locally preferred plan was requested a more nuanced approach that would consider more a localized, meaning stretch by stretch condition of the creek. And given that transition between the core study that went on for quite some time and this expression of local support for something slightly different, we had an opportunity to actively collaborate with an existing stakeholder group that had developed over that period of time and was actually the impetus for first starting our watershed-based project collaboration groups in the Aliso Creek watershed. So this is one of the key drivers for that group. And what we're presenting today on behalf of the county is the project concept that we've been working through over the last several months. Next slide. As I mentioned, we've been working with and providing updated information on the development of these concepts as we develop, as we get more information with the Aliso Creek project collaboration group. We've talked about that group several times to this committee, and I also included in the staff report an appendix, I think it was Appendix A, which detailed some of the information, some background information about that group. But that is 40 to 50 representatives from the Aliso Creek watershed that has developed desired outcomes collectively to demonstrate what they'd like to see happen in the watershed. And we are considering these as this project is developed, or these concepts rather are developed. And I have with me today Jennifer Shook. She is our mitigation manager for the County of Orange. And then a consultant team who's helping to develop the concepts and conduct some of the on-the-ground work. Representing Geosyntec are Aaron Pereski and Joe Lewis. Next slide. And this is where I will hand it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Jenna. So today we're going to talk about an assessment of the watershed characteristics and habitat considerations. That will just be a broad overview to set the stage, especially if there's members that aren't as familiar with this watershed or this project that we've started looking at. And then we'll go through reconnaissance level field assessments of what we've been undertaking to advance a restoration concept, as well as some of the planning tools that we'll use to develop some conceptual ideas and some restoration priorities that we are looking at that came out of that reconnaissance level and a lot of the data digging that we're doing in the background information. Next slide, please. So I will start with the assessment of the watershed characteristics. So the Aliso Creek watershed, it's 23,000 acres of open space, rural and urban development, agriculture, ranching, regional parks, and recreational facilities. This watershed spans 7 cities, including Aliso Viejo, Laguna Beach, Laguna Hills, Laguna Niguel, Laguna Woods, Lake Forest, and Mission Viejo. Next slide, please. Before urbanization of the watershed, Aliso Creek and some of its tributaries supported significant riparian habitat. It was dominated with a lot of hardwoods in this riparian corridor, including coast live oak, sycamore, alder trees, cottonwood, and arroyo willow. Currently, the most significant remaining portion of this riparian habitat exists in Aliso and Woods Canyon Wilderness Park in the lower, probably like 4 or 5 miles of this watershed. And that is accounts for 1/3 of the largest habitat types within that regional park, followed by coastal sage scrub and grassland. Next slide, please. If you can hit play. This is what you're seeing is a transition from the 1930s of this aerial image, and it'll transition to current time. But prior to development, Aliso Creek had water most of the year, and it was one of the streams within the region that did have water most of the year, primarily in the headwaters and the downstream ends through the Aliso Canyon. Many of the trees were cut down in the Spanish Mission period to construct building ships and other projects, primarily near the outlet into the coast where it was accessible by ship. And then during the early 20th century, groundwater withdrawal for agriculture killed off many of the remaining trees throughout the rest of the watershed. And then by the early 21st century, more than 70% of the watershed was urbanized, and a lot of the impacts from this upstream urbanization caused degradation to the downstream riverine habitat quality. And as you can see in the lower right corner of the graph there, the primary land use in this watershed is residential, followed by public. The public is primarily open space parks, but as you can see, that's in the lower end of the watershed where we see most of that acreage. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at, as Jenna said, I manage our mitigation program. So I work with staff from OC Parks and Waste and Recycling, and we are trying to identify projects within the county that we could do for restoration to offset our impacts or help, advance different restoration concepts. And so we ended up consulting with Geosyntec and 5 Smooth Stones to help us advance this restoration concept. And our focus right now with this current scope of work is in the Aliso and Wood Canyons Wilderness Park. The site is ideal. It's a county-owned park, and it's got that riparian corridor. It's one of the largest last remaining coastal riparian corridors in the region. And it also has the upland buffers, and so a lot of our focal species in this area depend on both the riparian and focal upstream buffers, and it also provides a linkage for wildlife movement. Next slide, please. And so this is what you're seeing is it's a query of the California Natural Diversity Database. So it shows all of the historical and current occurrences of species that have occurred in the lower watershed. So we often use this to decide design and restoration concept of what could we design for, what has this area supported, or what is currently there, and could we restore their habitat and expand their habitat. And so the focal species that we are looking at with habitat considerations for this conceptual project include the steelhead. If you can go click once, Andy. We've got our southern steelhead. So there is a historical occurrence in Aliso Creek in Aliso Creek. And so currently there are some impediments that would keep them moving upstream should they occur. And as Jenna had mentioned, there's a lot of grant opportunities associated with removing fish impediments. So that's something that we would look to address if we were able to do a project in Aliso Creek. Next, click. And we have southwestern pond turtle. So this is a species that is present within the watershed currently, and they depend on slow moving creeks, intermittent water, muddy bottoms or rocky bottoms, and they often overwinter in the upland habitat. So this is one of those species that really benefits from the habitat within the riparian corridor plus that upland and transitional habitat. And one more click, please. And the leaf-billed vireo. So this is a bird that is a summer breeder here in Southern California. So it comes to our region right about now, mid-March, and will stay through July to August. And it is endangered species, and it has been observed in the area, and it nests in riparian corridors in willow and mealfat thickets. And so these are the focal species that we would like to address through our restoration project. Next slide, please. And so with that, I will turn it over to Geosyntec. So they've been taking the desired outcomes and plus these watershed characteristics and habitat considerations in mind, went out to do reconnaissance level field assessments. So I will turn this over to Joe and Aaron, who will walk you through that.
Thank you, Jen. And thanks to the committee for inviting us in. I'm happy to be here. Certainly one of the highlights of my winter so far has been walking in this creek for a couple of days. So excited to share some of what we saw and how it kind of helps move the ball forward. So next slide, Andy. As many of you know, in order to get to the process, the spot the Corps did, there was a lot of work done to characterize the system and to evaluate geomorphic concepts. A lot of that still holds true. The initial characterizations of geomorphology, while they're now almost 10 years old, we definitely built on those. But in terms of thinking through the locally preferred plan and thinking through what else could be done in this system, we needed to do some additional characterization of what's what it currently looks like. There's been a lot of work done, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, related to invasive species removal. That certainly has a pretty significant effect on the geomorphology of a system when you start to get some of those big clumps of arundo out. And the stream is generally, in some places, started to heal itself in a different form. And so the purpose of this recon was to get out there. 5 Smooth Stones is on our team. That's a specialist in geomorphology and wildland stream restoration, as well as urban stream restoration. And so we were with them, and we wanted to present our results. There was 2 phases of this. The first was a little over 2 years ago that it involved spot visits to the creek to develop a mini regional curve, which I'll tell you about. That was sort of supported some initial planning. And then the work that we just completed and are currently working on is a more continuous traversal of the creek with a more focus on opportunity identification. And Joe will tell you more about that a little bit later on. So, and then after Joe presents what we saw in the field, we'll kind of come back and circle around to how do we put that together with some design concepts, some design paradigms, I should say, for incised channels and how we could apply that to start to peel off projects that could potentially be advanced. Next slide. That's where I'll hand it off to Joe.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So as Aaron mentioned, we completed a stream walk in December of 2021 of the lower 6 miles of Aliso Creek from Pacific Park Drive upstream to the Sakwa Coastal Treatment Plant downstream, and you can see the extents of the creek that we walked on the figure to the right. And there were 3 main goals to this stream walk. So next slide. The first was to document the stream condition. So all the dots that you can see in the figure on this slide are individual photo points, and in total we took over 600 photos over 2 days, really to document the conditions of the stream, including things like vegetation, nearby infrastructure, erosion and incision, the floodplain condition, invasive plant species and high water marks, and really anything else that we saw that was interesting through our creek walk, to really paint the picture of how things are, in the present state. So next slide. The next goal was to confirm reach delineations. So we recognize that this stretch of Aliso Creek is not monolithic. Individual sections have their own distinct characteristics and benefits and problems. And so defining individual reaches can help us break the creek up into more digestible units, which is really good for project conceptualization. So next slide. And then the final goal was really tying together the first 2 goals of where stream conditions might align well with reach breaks to look at where there might be potential opportunities to pursue restoration projects. And so the next 10 slides or so, we're going to take you on a stream walk with us through 3 different reaches, which you can see in the figure on the right. So reach 11 is the furthest upstream, and it might be helpful to note that these slides will be highlighted in green. Reach 10A is a little further downstream, and these slides will be highlighted in blue. And then reach 6 is the furthest downstream, and those slides will be highlighted in orange. And we're highlighting these 3 reaches in particular because we feel that they're more or less representative of sort of the range of conditions and opportunities that we saw in the creek. And so they provide a good context for moving forward and talking about potential restoration paradigms, which Aaron alluded to. So everyone can put their hip waders on and we'll move into reach 11. Next slide. So reach 11 represents an area with some substantial upland corridor that could be taken advantage of. It's adjacent to Aliso Niga High School and extends for approximately 3,000 feet. And then more specifically, this reach is defined by the upstream. At the upstream, there's some grouted riprap and then downstream this sort of armored riprap section. And interesting to note that this reach is further subdivided into 7 subreaches, which you can see on the most right-hand panel. Next slide. So really what we saw here in this stream was a relatively straight and somewhat incised channel, which you can see in the photo on the upper left. You can see in most of these photos, as well as the Google Maps screenshot here, that there is actually quite a bit of established vegetation in this reach, although as you can see in the screenshot from Google Earth, that it's somewhat narrow of a vegetated buffer and sort of localized right around the stream channel. And then one of the most striking features of this reach is just the amount of armoring that's along the banks. You can see in the lower photo the riprap that's right alongside that pedestrian biking trail. And then in the photo on the right, you can see about 80 feet of sheet pile that's right next to the high school. And this sheet pile is maybe 10, 15 feet tall, and you can see that this stream has kind of meandered over to it and has gotten channelized or stuck right on top of the wall, which of course might limit the value of the upland area, which brings us to the next slide. So sort of outside of that narrow vegetated corridor, there's a floodplain that's somewhat constricted, but not overly pinched by that pedestrian path, and then that maintenance or access road to the east. And so this floodplain represents an area that could potentially be, more connected to the stream and could achieve a higher value. And it might be interesting to note that there are some restoration efforts already in place in this reach by the Laguna Canyon Foundation, doing some planting in that sort of eastern floodplain area. And so there is potential in this reach in particular for synergies with that restoration effort. Next slide. So now we'll move on into reach 10A, which represents the most engineered and constricted of the 3 reaches that we'll discuss today. The downstream extent is at the Alma Road Bridge and extends approximately 550 feet upstream of that. And what's interesting about this section is that both the upstream and the downstream ends of this reach are at a fixed location. You can see that riprap in the upstream and then the bridge in the downstream. And so this reach represents like a really well-defined project area or project extent that we might pursue, or one might pursue for a project. Next slide. So the main features in this reach here are the really active channel erosion that you can see in the photo. And then in the screenshot, the just lack of a floodplain because this stream is so pinched between that pedestrian path and access road. And excuse me. This channel also represents maybe a potential over wide section. And so the water moves through this area quite slowly here and is more prone maybe to stagnation than other reaches of the stream. So next slide. Finally, we'll talk about reach 6, which represents maybe the most natural area of the 3 reaches that we're discussing today. And it starts at the aquip structure upstream and then ends at the confluence of Wood Canyon Creek with the Aliso Creek at the downstream end. And this reach is broken up into 2 subreaches, which you can see in the panel on the right. Next slide. So we'll spend a little time just looking at the aquip structure itself. The structure was installed by the Army Corps of Engineers a few decades ago, and it was intended to provide irrigation for riparian habitat restoration, and then also help with incision in this reach. And while it's doing a good job of holding stream grades in place upstream of this structure, we'll see that downstream it's sort of perpetuating that incision, sometimes downstream for quite a ways. You can see right after, immediately downstream of the structure, there's this deep pool that's forming, which is sort of leaving the structure itself perched. And you can see in the upper right-hand photo, sort of that riprap that's falling due to that incision downstream. And as we'll see on the next slide, the effects of this structure are not just localized to immediately downstream, but yeah, as shown here, they can be felt downstream for quite a ways. And so one of those effects is shown in the photo on the left here. The perspective is like a little odd in this photo, but the bank, you know, the stream has incised the channel to about probably 20 feet or so lower than where the floodplain currently is. And then this channel incision is also, you can see in the photo on the right, leaving the maintenance road that's to the east a little vulnerable. And so all along this reach, and then even further downstream, that bank you'll find is armored with riprap, as you can see in that photo. Next slide. So as we mentioned in the last slide, that stream's incision is leaving floodplains really disconnected from the active channel, which is keeping them sort of perched and high and dry. Right, these floodplains that you see in the right might be 20 feet or more above the groundwater tables, which makes vegetation establishment kind of hard and makes the quality of that floodplain area go down. And then because the stream doesn't have a floodplain to distribute high flows to or excess energy to, you can see in the photo on the right where that arrow is pointing to. As we were walking through the creek, we saw high water debris or rack lines that were sometimes 10 to 12 feet above the water surface. And so because the stream doesn't have anywhere else to put the water, it moves really quickly through this corridor. And so that can sort of perpetuate incision and drive the stream bed further down and away from the floodplain. So next slide. But that's not to say that this section or other sections within Aliso Creek aren't without value. So further downstream of the aqueduct structure, the creek has established sort of a new quasi-equilibrium, which you can see that transition on that Google Earth screenshot sort of right around where the terminus of that first photo area is. I mean, you can see the transition to a much more vegetated area where the stream has kind of reestablished itself with a nice pool riffle sequence and an inset floodplain. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Aaron, who's going to discuss how we can use all this information that we recently gathered.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Great tour. And so I'm going to talk in the next couple slides before we wrap up about sort of what we're doing with some of the survey data that we're pulling back and some of the observations towards moving potential project concepts forward. So next slide, Andy. So the first sort of component that's been developed thus far is what they call a mini regional curve. It's a pretty widely used tool for stream restoration planning. And what it does is it relates the drainage area of a system, a given system, to the sort of size of the stream. And it follows the principle that the stream is going to tell you what it wants. You can find stable, quasi-stable sections where the stream is in balance between its flow, its sediment transport, its vegetation, and it's formed an active channel that is stable. And so we can use some of those sections within this reach to then relate it to the stream drainage area. And this becomes what is referred to as a mini regional curve. So this is a starting point for a restoration concept. It doesn't tell you where to put it elevation-wise. It doesn't tell you how big the overbank needs to be. It doesn't tell you a lot of things, but it does give you a better sense of what it would take, what the stream wants to be when it grows up. So then next slide, Andy. So the next step that's been done thus far is to start to put that together into a four-tier channel design concept. This is a system that is modified hydrologically. There's a lot of development upstream of this. The system is quite a lot flashier than it was in a natural condition. It has higher storm flows. And so you do have to take that smaller active channel and combine it with some overflow capacity. One of the comparisons that I'm showing here is the sort of estimate of what that channel cross section could look like, informed by the mini regional curve compared to what the cross section was selected in the preferred option by the Army Corps. And so it's a more complex cross section. It recognizes the role of vegetation a little bit more, of having willows up to that sort of blue component on the lower left of this plot, kind of helping hold the system together. And generally, it's a smaller and narrower channel. And so there's an indication here that this could be more compatible with helping the system adapt to a new normal, and doing so in a way that doesn't have as much impact to some of the established riparian vegetation, potentially involves less earthwork. Next slide. So, those are both great, concepts. They still don't tell you exactly, what elevation you would put this at. And that becomes a pretty important consideration when you're dealing with an incised stream. It's a challenging situation when something has incised this much, because anything you're going to do to get it back to its floodplain, as we saw in the course concept, involves a pretty substantial effort. That said, there are some proven approaches that we're showing here that can achieve that with a little more balanced earthwork quantities. And I'll start in the upper left. And that's really trying to maximize the restoration potential by trying to get the channel back up on the floodplain. And instead of filling in the existing channel completely and constructing a new channel on top of it, it actually moves this channel off to the side, and it treats the old channel as an off-channel pool. So it can be a place for different types of species to rear. But you're effectively trying to balance cut and fill by allowing some of the off-channel areas to continue to be pools, and creating a new channel informed by the mini regional curve as to how big it should be. And the next option, moving to the upper right, would be to acknowledge that we may not be able to get it back up onto the floodplain. There's either not enough room, or the impacts would be too great to get it back up on the floodplain. But reestablishing an inset floodplain, broadening it. If you did nothing, the channel would broaden on its own. It would continue to go back and forth across the walls until it made room for itself. But in the process, it could damage things. So this would be an approach that would, where necessary, lay back outer walls, establish a new smaller channel in the middle, and do that with pretty limited earthwork and with a light touch for valuable vegetation. And then the third option down in the lower left would be something that would apply in an area that was more constrained, and there's not a lot of opportunity to widen, but there's still an opportunity to create more of an inset floodplain bench and a smaller stream system, so that you don't see that type of stagnation, and yet you still balance the energy in the system. So a lot of technical terms here. What I don't want to get into all those in detail, but what I do want to say is that there's some good options, and they're going to depend quite a bit on the reach. You saw the range of reach conditions that Joe presented. Some of these would be more conducive to one of these options than another. There's also, of course, the phasing. You can't pop the floodplain up on the channel, or up on the channel up on the floodplain and then drop it back down and pop it back up. You have to kind of go with a paradigm. And so then phasing becomes important. How do you break potential project reaches up? And I think it's pretty obvious to most that we're not going to do this thing all at once. It would be pretty prohibitive. And so how can we break it out potentially? And then, of course, where's the money going to come from? And what are the priorities of the funders? And so that can definitely inform what sort of benefits you're looking for. One more slide, Andy.
All right, I will jump in back here. Thank you, Aaron and Joe. So the next steps with the budget we have available, we'll continue to advance some of these concepts. As Aaron had said, we're trying to identify, are there stretches we could do? The core project, I think, was going to be over $100 million, and it's just not funding that any one agency has. And so part of working through that stakeholder group is, are there partnership projects? Could we leverage resources? Is there a shared need to do a restoration project? And a lot of times you get that economies of scale of working together. So just trying to understand if there's opportunities to work together. better suit us to apply for grants. I had talked about the steelhead trout. There's a lot of grants coming out to create fish habitat for anadromous fish and remove impediments. So maybe there's opportunities to pursue grants, or through our water quality improvement plan for South Orange County with water quality and water supply. Is there some restoration projects we could do that? Ideally, like I said, partner and see what we can do to leverage resources. A lot of these concepts that we've discussed today do work towards those outcomes, the desired outcomes from the stakeholder group, and helping set the stage for them too, so we can take some of these early concept ideas, and if someone has a specific project they need, they can start to use this data that we've started and run with it. And so right now we'll just keep going as far as we can on some of these conceptual designs, and then as the funding becomes available, we'll advance them further and, like I said, continue those partnerships through the stakeholder meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to questions.
I think I see Betty Burnet's hand is up, and then Sandra Jacobs after that.
Sandra, go ahead.
Oh, all right. Hi, it's Sandra Jacobs, Santa Margarita Water District. Thank you all for the presentation. I appreciate that. Really gives me a good visual of what's going on. The $100 million price tag, that's just the restoration part. Have you estimated what the operation and maintenance of the facility is? It's kind of a two-part question. That was one of it. And then besides grant opportunities, does the county anticipate that the Aliso Creek Restoration Project would be submitted online and scored for the executive committee to consider for some of these proposition funding opportunities? Thanks. Those are my two questions.
I can take the first one, and then Jenna, I may need your help with the second one. As far as long-term operation and maintenance costs, we don't have those captured. We track for similar projects at the county through our mitigation program. When we do compensatory mitigation, there is an in perpetuity requirement. So should any of the sections be undertaken for compensatory mitigation, that definitely comes with a forever maintenance. So that gets planned into your project cost. And if there's a grant application, or if it's has grant funding to do a project, most grants also have some sort of long-term costs, but I can't speak to what the costs are. And that 100 million was quite an extensive project, so we're looking to maybe utilize some of the restoration that's already been done. I know Laguna Canyon Foundation's done a lot of work in the region, so we don't want to impact some of their projects, but perhaps enhance some of that. So there might be some leapfrogging. So it wouldn't be that 100 million for that whole entire lower 6 miles. We would try to break it up in smaller projects. And so then that funding, it becomes almost like a funding package for each section that we would take on as a project. So part of what we would look at through the conceptual design is, could we do a section on its own without impacting the downstream or upstream stabilization of the creek?
And to the second part, some of it comes down to timing. This would definitely be a regionally applicable and beneficial project, and I know it's one that's been watched by our committee and most of our other interested parties in the region. We're working to advance the concepts as far as we can take it, as Jennifer said, and some of that we'll have to see when the call for projects opens, if we have a section that we think is far enough along to seek funding for. But as Jennifer said, we're definitely not doing this from the top, from Pacific Park to the CTP. We're going to be sectioning this off in discernible, and more easily fundable chunks. And I think that will certainly help, hopefully propel things forward a little bit better funding wise.
Yeah, and let me just jump in here real quick to clarify, Sandra, the $100 million price tag was the core project. We don't have a total dollar amount for restoration these restoration concepts for that full 6 miles. So I just want to clarify that that was in reference to what the Corps proposed was $100 million. It is not this project.
So it could be more, but it could be less.
Yes.
We would hope less with the less intensive
Yeah, we'd hope.
excavation than what the Corps proposed.
The Corps proposal involved about I think 500. I don't remember the quantities. A massive amount of hauling in import, so it wasn't balanced cut fill wise, which influenced the cost.
And I understand that, and I appreciate you. Yeah, that's the Army Corps is probably always gonna be on the higher side, but without a project sponsor pushing this through, I guess that's your next step, and you can start knocking on doors and inviting people to participate for these goals that this governing body is supposed to look at projects on, and sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. So thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, Sandra. Betty Bernay.
Yeah, thank you. Can you go back one slide to the little drawing slide? One more back. So when I'm looking at this, at the slide that's on the right-hand side, the new stable channel, is what you're telling me that the little red line would be the current and the black lines would be the new proposed sort of layout of the bottom and sides of the channel? Is that what you're communicating?
Yeah, in concept.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily this approach. It's more. It doesn't require moving the channel from one side to the other. This diagram is maybe a little misleading in that regard, Betty.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the idea in like one of the slides that was earlier that we may have a decent some decent vegetation already established, but we have some oversteep banks that may be threatening infrastructure. So this would be there would be a desire to kind of widen the outer banks, leave the stream channel in its intact state, if in fact it is, and make more room for those flood flows so that when they do occur, they can spread out more and they don't cause the kind of erosion that we're still seeing on the outer banks of the channel. If the channel was kind of over wide and had already been scoured out by flood flows, it might actually mean making that low flow channel smaller and a little more compact so that you can start to get vegetation along its sides, and it can hold back some gravels and it can form again and also lay back the sides. So this is a very much it's very much informed by the exact conditions you see in each reach. It has to be, it can't be informed by really any one concept. It's got to be like almost fingerprinted to the system as to where you need to have some intervention and where it's just working well by itself. So with this approach, I would not imagine that it's kind of monolithic where the whole entire reach is having some touch. There could be whole 500,000 foot sections that really don't get much touch, and then there might be a few areas that are need to be modified.
Okay, a couple more questions. Has your presentation and these concepts been shared with the group that's been working, the stakeholder group that's been working, or is this coming here first, or sort of what stage in talking to the stakeholder groups are you in?
They've been part of the conversations through this early conceptual, and we've briefed them after that first field reconnaissance. We just have not brought the photos, what you saw Joe walk through your hip wader tour of Aliso Creek. That will be our next presentation to the stakeholder, but they are aware of us collecting all of this data and looking for some conceptual ideas. And ideally, if they have some conceptual ideas, this is hopefully setting the stage work for other stakeholders to also come to the table if they have conceptual ideas or projects, maybe not even necessarily the lower 6 miles of the watershed, but anywhere else in the Aliso Creek watershed.
And I will add to that, if I may just real quickly add to that, We've presented all the way through, including, like Jen said, we haven't talked about the December 2021 Creek Walk, but we have actually walked everyone through the development and what would go into a mini regional curve and these conceptual restoration paradigms. So the group has actually heard most of this. The new piece was the Creek Walk that we wanted to share, given that it was I think it really paints the picture, and we do intend to come back to the ELISO group as we start to develop some of these potential concept paradigms.
One more question and then a comment. My next question is there, this is just not an informed opinion, but it's more of just wondering, is there going to need to be an approach where one area or another is tackled first so that when the restoration work is done, it's not torn out or disturbed by high flow conditions, which we have from time to time? So will you be ordering kind of like upstream or downstream where to go first when you're thinking about maybe compartmentalized approaches?
Yeah. Absolutely. Phasing is important. It's most important in the reach around the aqueduct structure, the last one that Joe talked about, because of the role that structure plays in the existing stability, and because of how how relatively long that reach is downstream. That has a lot of interrelationships. The first two that we talked about are a little bit more bite-sized in the sense that they already have fixed boundary conditions on the upstream and downstream side. So there wouldn't, they're an opportunity to do a project without a lot of, relationship to the upstream or downstream reach, which is a benefit to potentially working there. But yeah, the broader answer to your question is that phasing is really important. And yeah, it can also be relevant for funding. Sometimes funding isn't available for upstream work, may not be available for upstream work if there's still downstream fish passage barriers. And
Right, that's a good point. And then just a quick comment. I attended the Utility Managers Conference this last week, and there was quite a bit of discussion on the availability of federal infrastructure funding. And one of the programs talked about was a FEMA grant called Building Resilient Infrastructure. It has up to $66.5 million for floodplain issues in it. I took a bunch of notes at the conference, but it can also be used to address intermittent drought conditions. So maybe while there's discussion going on about further development, since it appears the federal government is going to be releasing quite a bit of funding, it would be worth it for this kind of approach to really think about how to coordinate local funding with some of these other opportunities that are on the federal side. So that's just a comment. But I'm very interested in what you've done, and I really appreciate this presentation and the tie to the actual pictures of the on-the-ground conditions. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you, Betty. We have several more questions, and in the interest of time, let's see if we can tighten up a bit. Mayor Wheeler.
Hello. Very interesting presentation. I've never had one quite this elaborate, I'll say. The magnitude of the money plus the maintenance is kind of swamping my city budget, pun intended. Are there any stagnant areas in the length of this creek? The reason I ask is I was back east. I was worried about stagnant areas being bad because you have mosquito production and things like that.
Yeah, there's the creek has perennial flow. Summertime flows, dip down to about 4 CFS. So in like the picture I've got behind me right now is right near the coastal treatment plant. It's one of the flattest and broadest sections. There's actually grade control underneath the bridge to the coastal treatment plant, which holds some of that water back. So it's not moving fast, but it's moving. And it's not.
As long as it's moving, that generally takes care of that problem. Are there any fish in this place?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are there any fish in the stream?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had one fairly significantly sized one dart past us, so
Huh.
that was exciting.
Okay. Charge for fishing pass. You talk about restoration. I guess I'm curious, what was it? How do you know what it was before, and what caused it to be in need of restoration?
We can go off of historical aerials to know what it was before, older records, seeing what species were there and knowing what type of habitat would support those species. Looking at reference streams and watersheds in the region can give us some clues to what it should be. So using that data is how we could design for that and know, what we'd want to bring in and just objectives for the region too. You can adapt it as well, so looking at water supply, water quality, making sure that we're meeting different recreational needs and purposes for the system.
I guess I really don't see this as a recreational stream. It's too shallow, or
I shouldn't say recreating in the stream itself, but I'm sorry, I should have said beneficial uses. It's a mischaracterization
Okay.
for me, but the beneficial uses for habitat and water supply, water quality.
Okay, thank you.
There are trails.
Yeah, adjacent trails.
Yeah, there are adjacent trails and bike paths. So it is highly visible throughout a good portion of this. So that's the other potential benefit is that this is something that is really important to a lot of folks because they see it. Kids see it when they walk to school, things like that. So, and one of the stretches that we highlighted that's higher up in the watershed is adjacent to one of those key areas. So it could also serve some of these potential bite-sized pieces could also serve as good like demonstration projects for the whole, purpose of restoring Aliso Creek.
Thank you, Jenna. We have a
Okay, thank you.
question from Kevin Onuma and then Douglas Erdman. Kevin?
Just a quick, thanks. Just a quick question. I guess this is actually restoration as opposed to compensatory mitigation, correct?
We are looking at restoration concepts, which could serve compensatory mitigation, or it could serve as a grant project if there's grant funding for restoration projects. So there's different compliance drivers. So that's depending on what that compliance driver is, would depend on the funding. So you can't typically get grant funding to do compensatory mitigation. So we're always on the search for meeting or finding habitat to meet our compensatory mitigation needs, hence some of this exploration in this watershed. But it's such a large such a large opportunity in this lower 6 miles. So we recognize that if we could break it off into segments, one segment could potentially be compensatory mitigation to meet that need. Another segment might be removing a fish passage. So they're complementary efforts, but they may have different funding sources and compliance needs.
Yeah, so the reason why I ask is then any long-term maintenance requirements might differ then because the mitigation typically has mandatory requirements, endowments, and all of that, whereas the restoration pieces, if there's grants, then there might just be grant funding requirements and expectations, but not necessarily the same type of requirements for endowments and everything else then. So it'll depend on, I guess, each reach then.
Correct. And then sometimes the grant funding, it does, as that grant is sunsetting, they will look to a local agency or the landowner to take on some of the long-term management. So it just depends on how the grant is written or if there's funding set aside for long-term management, there could potentially be that.
Okay, thanks.
Doug Erdman?
Yeah, you mentioned water supply as a consideration, so I just have a comment and a question. One, I just want to note that South Coast does have a water right in Aliso Creek, so want to make sure that that's taken into consideration in any of the improvements we're looking at. And the other is, it looked like that in the first map that you walked the lower 6 miles. Are there any considerations for the upper 6 miles or the upper portion? Because I know Lake Forest has a lot of erosion along certain reaches of the Aliso Creek that have significant erosion, and if there are any plans for projects in that area.
Addressing water supply, first off, removing a lot of the non-native species, especially arundo, can help contribute to augmenting the water supply, groundwater supply as well, just because they suck up a lot of water. And so that can contribute to, if we can restore it to a more natural ecosystem. And then this current focus right now is looking at the lower 6 miles because we just had limited funding and it was funded through my program, the mitigation program. And so our interest is looking for habitat creation as more funding becomes available, or if there's other stakeholders that are interested in looking at upstream segments, then that's something that we're hoping to, like I said, leverage the resources through the stakeholder group. So if there's partnership projects or opportunities and there's that compliance need upstream, or a flood need to shore up something and also do restoration with it, then we would hopefully be able to walk through those projects at the stakeholder meeting as well.
And I will add to that, we also, through the Aliso Collaboration Group, we had looked at potential projects throughout the entirety of the watershed, and there are a number of potential projects or current projects in upstream of this reach in the highly urbanized area. We also know that there's other potential concepts out there because we've been having additional conversations with folks to say, what else could be done. And those conversations continue, and we hope that folks will come. We hope to have another Aliso Collaboration Group meeting sometime in the late spring, maybe early summer, where we can go through some of this potential concept information from this, but then also hopefully, because more funding is becoming available, that some of those other concepts that are further up in the watershed will also come to the Aliso meetings to kind of bring those forward and have a robust conversation about the entirety of the watershed.
Thank you. I think that concludes our committee member comments. I've been monitoring public comments and I don't see any hands raised. Does anybody else see any hands raised?
There are no hands, but we did have a chat comment from Steve Deshawn. I'll just read it aloud. Please remember that it's the same thing that was just stated. Please remember that South Coast Water District has a water right in Aliso Creek at the CTP Bridge. The current approved right is 890 acre feet per year. I see no other comments.
Thank you. And I want to thank Jennifer, Aaron, and Joe for a great presentation. I know a lot of us would have liked to have put on hip waders and walked around the stream with you. So thank you very much. This is a receive and file. So thank you everyone for your interest in this topic. Moving on to item number 8. Well, excuse me, the executive officer's report.
All right, well, in the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight, and so we'll probably click through the slides pretty quickly. So you want to go to the next slide, please. Just a quick status update, given some timing challenges and now for finding a meeting date for visioning, as well as now the current anticipated grant schedule, we are anticipating that the visioning process will be delayed until the completion of the grant application process. That's, as you know, a really big staff lift, and so we'll be postponing the visioning ad hoc until most likely early 2023. Next slide, I'll point you back to the written staff report. We've got several updates on reports that have been submitted lately and some recent legislative work. One thing that is not included in the written report that we just became aware of yesterday is there is a new potential water bond out there with up to $200 million in IRWM funding that's being proposed under AB 3287. So we will continue to provide you updates on that, but if you want to take a look and see at least what is currently proposed, check that one out. Go on to the next slide, please. And then we just wanted to mention to those of you who may not be aware, but Richard Gardner has passed, and he passed away in early December. And we all know how dedicated he was to South Orange County and watershed health in our area. So there was a very nice article on him in the Dana Point Times in the January 6th edition. So Just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you.
And with that, that wraps up my report.
Very good. So that brings us to any member comments, any more comments from executive committee members? If you have anything left to say, please raise your hand.
If I could just add, I would be honored to adjourn this meeting in memory of Richard Gardner. He came to every one of our meetings over from the very beginning. And if you ever get this restoration done, I think we should call it the Richard Gardner Creek Restoration. Thank you.
Great idea, Sandra. So seeing no further questions or comments, Sandra has moved to adjourn the meeting in order of Mr. Gardner, and I concur. Our next meeting date is to be determined. Please, when you get the RSVP request from Maria, respond promptly so that we can establish quorum. And the quicker you show up for quorum, the quicker we're done with anything AB 361. So
Yes, please. Thank you.
thank you, everyone who came today, and have a great rest of your evening.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good meeting.
Great job.